Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Ozcast.
Episode 6 of the Maker and the Drinker podcast. John Retsis is the maker. How are you, JR?
Yeah, pretty good, Jason.
No, I'm Jared.
Oh, Jared. Pretty good, Jared.
I tell you what, we haven't had any wine yet. So we're going to be speaking to a Jason in a second anyway. I am the drinker and I'm having water at the moment because I've been struggling to get a car park in the city. So I need to cool down. JR, we were at Home of the Brave almost this time last week getting ready for Christmas, and it was a fantastic celebration. Can you give us the details on the opening hours of Home of the Brave going through the Christmas period?
Yeah, so we'll still trade up until this Friday the 18th, and then we'll have a break so we can go fishing until Wednesday the 6th. Mm-hmm. And then we'll trade from Wednesdays to Sundays inclusive for tastings, tapas and good times.
Brilliant. We were lucky enough to meet some people that we've spent the past couple of years at your Christmas function with. Just very quickly, First Drop Wines.
I'm glad you remember it.
Yeah, I remember a little bit of it. First Drop Wines, go check out Home of the Brave leading into Christmas and into 2021. Episode 6, I know that you're going to like our next guest. Some of the stories which we got kind of started in over a couple of wines and beautiful food last week. So we'll let the special music play, then we'll get into it. John, we are ready to go. Episode 6 of The Maker and the Drinker. I'm going to throw it over to you to introduce our very special guest.
Jason Barrett has had a long and colourful and very distinguished career in not only wine but also in the military. Known Jason for a few years now, and his stories are always fascinating to hear where he's made wine in Australia for some significant brands, but also in the US and France. So maybe we'll throw over to Jason. He can talk to us about, I guess, how he started in wine, how he started in the military, and how we've all sort of ended up here today.
Yeah. We're sitting here in the Ozcast Network studios, mate, and we've been pumped to speak to you. As soon as we saw you last week, John and I were like, we need to speak to Jason on the podcast straight away, because just some of the stories you told us, I'm like, I can't believe we get to talk to this guy. So, mate, welcome. Thank you. Where do we start?
No worries. Thanks very much for letting me come on your podcast. I started off initially. I'm from Victoria, grew up in the Yarra Valley, although no affiliation with wine at that stage. Always wanted to join the military, and upon finishing year 12, joined the regular army and end up getting posted to Woodside Barracks here in South Australia. Bit of a culture shock coming from Victoria to South Australia. Coming in January, it was quite dry and certainly a little bit different to where I live in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne there, just as far as infrastructure and transport and the like. So I spent 13 years in the military up at Woodside. I was part of air defence artillery, so surface to air missiles. So basically a bird gunner. My main job there was to provide protection up in the far north to vital assets and airfields there against aircraft attacks. So we had a complement of surface to air missiles that we were able to employ if required.
So you're using a lot of technical terms there. So basically you're sitting there with a weapon if an evil plane flies over and you need to shoot it. Is that right?
So essentially we have about 5 seconds to make a decision as to whether or not that is a friendly or hostile aircraft potentially worth $200, $300 million, and or protecting the assets there. So obviously a lot of responsibility for our little crew. We had 2 different types of systems that we used. We had a manned packable one, so we used to go in with the special forces before the main sort of infantry groups come through to basically protect them when come through. So we've got a big range of sort of skills there that we used to employ.
Did you ever have to press the fire button?
We've fired in training.
Yeah.
Our guys were deployed on the ships in the Gulf, in both the first Gulf War and in the operations in the recent Afghanistan and Iraqi wars. So yeah, our guys have been there. Unfortunately, I suppose that we haven't had to fire in angst, but we're there just if required.
I love hearing about this stuff because I was at lunch for my wife's birthday over the weekend with someone who used to work in the Navy, and he was saying like there was a stretch of 50 days that he was on a ship, didn't know when he was going to be coming home. Like sometimes you're posted going, here's your start date, here's your end date, but so much unknown. And then saying, yeah, we're just on the water just in case something happens. Like you've always got to be kind of at the ready, which is fascinating because you go from that into something you're doing now. It's like, I don't know if I can even make a segue into, oh yeah, that actually makes sense how you got involved with wine.
So yeah, how I ended up getting into wine, getting into the military when I was younger there, I've had a sort of, a lot of sort of interest in World War I and particularly in Gallipoli and the Western Front. So a group of us soldiers decided to go on a battlefield tour of the Western Front back in 1999 and went to Gallipoli and all through, and each of us had a particular battle which we spoke to the rest of us there in regards to what was going on at the time and things. And it's good enough to read things in a book, and it's sort of very similar to wine as well there if you're reading about a particular region or vineyards. But when you're actually standing on the ground and be able to see how close the soldiers were between both forces and things like that and what they had to go through really puts it into perspective there as to those particular battles that you're reading in a book and the like. So yeah, it was quite amazing to be able to have the opportunity to travel to those regions, and I've been several times since. But it was on that first trip in 99 that I spent about 6 weeks after we did the tour, just travelling throughout Europe and doing the backpacker thing, jumping on the U-Rail and travelling through wine regions, and certainly fell in love with the amazing places where wine grapes are grown and the regions where they're from. Back in those days there, it was just drinking cheap €2 or €3 bottles of Plonk with the local cheese and charcuterie there as we're travelling through those regions. And it really sort of was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, and I thought, well, I couldn't see myself digging holes in the Northern Territory there and spending a month or so out in the field there with all the flies and the snakes and everything there in my 50s and 60s, whereas with wine, you're certainly not limited by age there, and particularly having that opportunity to be able to sort of potentially travel the world and make wine in different regions. And so, yeah, I made the hard decision to leave the military in 2002 and study winemaking here in Adelaide.
Yeah, right. When was the minute or the second where it just sort of pinged? You think, you know what, bugger it, this is what I want to do. I want to drink wine, make wine, and
yeah. Well, I'd always had an interest in science, and when I was in the army, I was studying a science degree, and yeah, I think it's just everything about the sort of the wine there, being able to see it's agriculture and farming. My parents had a dairy and cattle farm in central Victoria, and yeah, I like getting hands-on and dirty as well there, and be able to see the sort of rewards that you get from tending the soil and looking after the vines, to someone enjoying that glass or bottle of wine that you've laboured on, and your sort of blood, sweat and tears that goes into producing it. And certainly wine for me is that sort of time capsule of a place and a time or a celebration as well there. So it's sort of interesting to see there that some of the most amazing vintages in the world over time have been through a lot of turmoil and things like that there. 1945 is an amazing vintage of wine in Bordeaux and Burgundy and Champagne, and that was at the end of World War II. So there's a lot of significant things that we can sort of place with the vintages of the wines that we make.
So, John, you said when I spoke to you like a couple of episodes ago, this is your wine journey started through your family and the winemaking process and having lots of Greek wine. But then, Jace, it seems like with you, like, correct me if I'm wrong, you you fell in love with the journey and the places which the wine was connected to. So it wasn't necessarily the wine, it was the destination or wherever you were, and then the wine was a part of it. That's an amazing way to look at it, because you all have ended up at the same destination, but how you got there is quite different.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I suppose upon graduating from university, I was a mature age student and certainly hadn't had any industry experience prior to starting my winemaking degree. A lot of sort of famous names were a part of my year at university there. I had Johann Henschke and Charlie Seppelts and the like there. So these are families that have grown up as kids working in the vineyards and working in the wineries. So, and that a lot younger than I am as well. So I sort of made the sort of conscious decision to put in the hard yards there and do the dual harvests there. After sort of graduating from uni, I went straight to Penfolds, which is very fortunate. I sort of captured probably one of the sort of most prestigious roles there as a cellar hand at the original winery at Penfolds at Magill. And after the vintage finished, I decided to go over to Canada to make wine. So, and from then on, I've sort of been doing those dual harvests on and off now for almost 18 years.
So you went to Penfolds, and then how long were you there for before you travelled?
The 12 months. I was employed for the 12-week harvest period there, sort of from February through to May, and I continued on a little bit after that, working in cellar door until I went over to Canada around August, and then stayed there through till December.
What can you talk me through? Because the idea of this podcast is that John's the maker, so he asks all the smart questions, and I just drink the wine, so I ask all the kind of simple questions.
Don't bet on that.
Cellar hand. What does that mean? What do you do? What's your role there day to day?
Well, cellar hand is the sort of entry point. We're the guys that do all the hands-on work there. So it's a lot of cleaning and sanitation. Winemaking is a lot about hygiene. So it's a little bit different working at Magill compared to, for example, John's winery there, where it's predominantly stainless steel fermentation. At Magill Estate, it's the original winery built in the late 1800s, all concrete, wax-lined open fermenters, very little amount of equipment. We don't even have any, at that stage, no hot water even in the winery. So basically picking the grapes, crushing them into the fermenter, doing our pump overs, quite labour intensive. Obviously, pre all the OH&S things that we need to deal with now, although they've changed that over my time at Penfolds. But old school winemaking, essentially making wine the same way that Max Schubert, when he first created Grange back in 1951, in the exact same cellar, using the same equipment.
Jason, to me, comes across as a really good historian. Like, you obviously research heavily and absorb all of that stuff, which I love, because you naturally talk about, when you speak, you refer to something which happened in a particular time, which shows that you're passionate about, just like you, JR, like you connect to things so easily. Can you talk about, John, when we say, because I want to talk about Magill Estate and Penfolds. John, from your perspective, when people say Penfolds, I guess in South Australia and internationally, that's what people who travel from overseas like, we need to go there normally.
Yeah, correct. So Penfolds, in my mind's eye, is the most famous wine brand in Australia, and they make one of the most iconic wines in the world, and probably the most iconic wine in Australia, which is Grange. The estate, or the winery where Jason worked at, just up the road here at Magill, literally 15 minutes from the city, I guess was the home of Penfolds. It's where it sort of basically started in the day about around 120 years ago.
Well, actually, a little bit longer than that. 1844, only 8 years after the settlement here in South Australia.
Wow.
Dr. Penfolds and his family migrated from England to start a new life. He bought grapevines from the south of France, which he planted to produce his medicines and tonics. And 175 years ago now, here we are today, and producing one of the most iconic wines in the world. All started with medicine, and looking back to those early days, Dr. Henry Lindeman's wines are all medical doctors producing wines for those sort of medical tonics and things in those early days, and we've certainly come a long way from there.
So where are the Grange grapes?
So,
Because I've got no idea. So, because whenever I associate Grange or Penfolds, I think Magill Estate. But then I go out to Home of the Brave and Penfolds there. Like, talk a simpleton like me through this, please.
So Grange, well, the very first vintages of Grange were sourced from the Grange vineyard, which is the Magill Estate.
Yes.
So the cottage, as you go up the main driveway to the winery on the left-hand side, was Dr. Penfold's original house, built in 1845. And that was known as the Grange Cottage, and the vineyard was known as the Grange. So when Max Schubert created Penfolds Grange in 1951, it was sourced from those old vines that were planted at Magill, and some of those vines still exist to today. As initially, this was quite a different style of wine to what we were producing in Australia there. At Magill at the time there, it was all fortifieds, ports and sherries and brandies. And Max in 1948 had travelled overseas with Penfolds to study production of sherry, but he went to Bordeaux and was quite amazed at these dry red styles of wines, things that he'd never really sort of had exposure to before, and got his mind ticking a little bit and decided to do some small trials back in 1951 and continued producing the wine for several years after that. He then provided some samples to the family members. It was still a family-run company at that stage, and the family board basically didn't like the style of wine. That style was quite different to what Penfolds was producing at the time, and they told him to cease production. So Max, being who he was, continued to produce the wine in secret from 1957 through to 1959 until he was giving away some of those earlier vintages that had been produced to different sort of identities and critics and doctors and things around Australia. And it wasn't until 1960 that the decision was made to recommence production of that wine. Obviously, a lot of European migrants settled in Australia post-World War II and started planting vines and producing the wines that they were used to drinking back home in Europe. So there was a bit of a shift away from the sort of fortifieds and brandies and things to sort of dry red production, and sort of now
in those days it was predominantly fortified. Everything was fortified and sent back to the old country or what have you. You'd sit down to an English roast at 45 degrees and you'd have a sherry.
Right, okay.
So things have changed a little bit, which is probably a good thing. So Penfolds, 11 years there, got the Don't Come Monday. What does Jason Barrett do next?
Well, I quickly jump on a plane to France and head over to the Rhone Valley. I've been working over there sort of off and on since 2009, and working in an amazing little area just sort of bordering on Gigondas in southern Rhone. A wine brand called Chêne Bleu. It's at a property called La Verrière, which was built in 1429. And the current owners, Nicole and Xavier Rollet. So Xavier is the CEO of the London Stock Exchange, and Nicole's ex-Goldman Sachs vice president. So they've settled in Europe, bought this beautiful property, and have built it up and created a wine brand, which I've been fortunate enough to go and work. And it was how I ended up in France there, that Peter Gago, the chief winemaker at Penfolds, was at the London Wine Fair in 2008 and met Nicole, and she said she'd love for a Penfolds winemaker or something to come over and hang out and see what they do and give a little bit of advice and whatnot. And Peter let me know, and the rest is history now. I've been sort of working with Chêne Bleu now, and unfortunately with COVID this year, I was supposed to be back over there at the moment. So it's an amazing place. No expenses spared with the winery there, all biodynamic, and we've been sort of touted as the sort of the super Rhone, as the super Tuscans are in Italy there, not playing by the appellation rules in regards to what grape varieties we grow and how we make them. And
So what are you growing and making over there? Is it,
So it's predominantly Grenache and Syrah, bit of white. Obviously, we are in Provence, so rosé is certainly one of the sort of wines that we do, and certainly one of my passions. There's nothing better than working during harvest there, and particularly sort of at the end of the day or during the lunches, as the traditional sort of European winemaking vintage goes there with the long lunches and plenty of wines of the grapes that we're picking at that day. We tend to drink the previous vintages of the wines that we produce there, but also the best examples from around the world of those varieties as well. And
so long lunches and then you just pass out and sleep. Is that vintage in Greece?
Well, yeah, well, it is. Wine makes itself there, so we're just the conduits to ensure that it gets into the bottle.
So can I ask, because obviously, I would see you previously working with Penfolds would be like AFL coach who's coached at the highest level. So if you're a coach for a premiership team, right? Try and use this sporting analogy. Working at Penfolds, you're the coach of a premiership team, which means if any other club is looking, it always looks good on your resume to go, this person has coached at a premiership team. So it always helps, which has obviously helped you make those connections over in Europe, which is brilliant. And I want to talk about connections very soon because I've got lots of questions. John, I wanted to ask you, from that Penfolds connection, and you as a winemaker yourself, who is a competitor of Penfolds, let's be honest, and not a fierce competitor, because you encourage everybody to drink whatever the fuck they want, right? That's the first time I've said the F word on this podcast as well. I apologise. I'm so angry about that car park in the city. As a winemaker, though, do you go, we need to find something which matches this because they're at the benchmark, or do you go, you know what, they've got their own market, we need to focus on what we're doing? And in media, we always say you don't have to be competitor focused, but you can be competitor aware.
Yeah, sure. Good question. Look, my philosophy is you just need to be true to yourself and make the wines that you believe in and you want to make. And that's how we started First Drop. It was all about making the wines that we wanted to make, in the packages that we wanted to package them in terms of labels and just be a little bit different. So we respect other wineries in Australia, and that's their bag. I mean, Penfolds has been around for a long time, and it's we're aware, obviously, because they're our neighbours in Europe, but we don't really take too much attention to style or packaging or whatever. They're quite a traditional producer, and that's their thing. So yeah, respect everyone. We've got some great brands in the Barossa. We're very blessed to have some amazing producers like Torbreck, like Henschke, like there's I don't want to leave any out. There's plenty. St Hallett that I've been involved in over the years. And they all have their own style. They all have their own sort of reason for being. But definitely from a First Drop perspective, it's always been our intention to be, the people that we want to be in terms of in the industry, and the offering in terms of wine is the wines that we like to drink. And I think that's probably true for most winemakers. It's all about being true to yourself. I mean, that doesn't apply to everyone, but I think most.
Yeah. Now, Jason, before we talk about what you're doing now, because you're basically a gun for hire now, which I think is brilliant. For you, what is the most expensive bottle of red you have tried or seen someone purchase?
Well, being a winemaker at Penfolds there, and I've been fortunate enough to have tried, numerous great bottles and sort of iconic wines across there. Obviously, probably the most expensive one is probably something like the 51 Grange there, that now a complete set sold yesterday at Langton's there for over $400,000.
Is that the oldest one as well in existence?
Well, it's the oldest Grange is the 51, but it was a complete set that sold. But I think the last auction price for that was $90,000 a bottle there. So, and I've tried the 51 probably 8 or 9 times over recorking clinics and things. But
so when you try that, because I think sometimes when you have a a gathering with people, and you all bring a bottle of wine, sometimes it turns into a bit of a dick measuring competition because it's what you taste. For me, it's like I could be blindfolded and I'm not an expert in the field, but I'm still at the stage where I'm like, hey, I don't want too much pressure on myself to know what I'm drinking. However, it is an experience, isn't it? Because you yourself, I said you're a historian, mate, so you actually would understand everything that goes into it to get to that point.
Yeah, well, some things that I look at there, it's not necessarily the producer there, but things of exceptional vintages as well there. Those amazing vintages, things like the 1982 in Bordeaux is one of those sort of classic things. So being able to try any wine from that vintage and to see how those wines have developed and aged over the years there. And obviously there's a lot of people that drink labels, and particularly with the first growths there or Romani Conti, those sort of things there that, I've spent a lot of time in China and at the end of the night there, the chateau.
A lot of fake wine.
There's a lot of fake wine too, but that's part of that whole, it's about the sort of image and, gifting and those kind of things there. So when they bring out a Chateau Lafite at the end of the night there and you're gumbaying...
did you get scared the first time you saw that like I did, sitting with John a couple of years ago? I'm going, John, they're drinking the good wine, don't scull it. And he said, hey, it's all about the consumption.
Yeah. Well, and with one of my former employers there, I was over in China and, he brings out a 2012 Grange and a 1989 Lafite, and you've got the glass and they're going to Gumbay. And I said, look, I'm happy to Gumbay Grange because I've tried that, thousands of times, but I'm going to have that Lafite and I'm pour me a bit more and I'm just going to enjoy and savour that moment. And I think, and something that I try to educate when I am over in China there, that this isn't just for the celebration like champagne at the Grand Prix and spraying it around everywhere. This is about, there's a lot of blood, sweat and tears that goes into making a wine there, and particularly wines that have been cellared for a considerable amount of time as well. We want to sort of enjoy that. So I do a lot of education there of saying, well, we spend a lot of time here, think about what we're drinking and where it's come from, because wine is a time capsule there of what was happening at that time in a particular vintage. And I know, John's the same. We have the favourite wines and of the wines that we make as well there. You think back to some of those things and people go, oh, how do you know what happened in 2008 during harvest or whatever? Well, we had 18 days over 35 degrees from the 3rd of March because we lived it. And it is hard.
All of our fruit came in before that heat wave in 2008. Just want to make sure.
Well,
like everybody else.
I had Adelaide Hills Pinot there, and I had 50 tonnes out laying along the side of the wine.
Mate?
No, well, it was actually one of the better Pinots we ended up making. But I ended up having all the girls come from the restaurant there and bucketing Pinot into fermenters and things, and we ended up processing a quarter of our vintage in one day.
Wow. Up at Magill.
Up at Magill.
Yeah. So what's the capacity of Magill? Is it 400 tonnes?
Ideally, we sort of look at about 180, 200 tonnes. My last year, 2016, we did 350. That was a push, but with a condensed vintage, you got to do what you got to do.
So you're in China, you're gumbaying, thousands of dollars worth of wine, and you're educating these Chinese, and it's all good. And 2 weeks ago, we get these tariffs, and the world's changed for Australian wine. How does it look for you guys now? Because you're now making wine at Roland at Lindok for a Chinese-owned winery, and we've discussed it, over some beers and earlier. The industry's changed. How does it look for you guys? What's the way forward?
Yeah, well, it is certainly challenging, and we've been sort of working over the last few months there when there were sort of hints of the tariffs coming in, and 90% of the wine that I produce at Hemera goes over to China. So I've got to now sort of look at ways we go about, changing our sort of business model just to keep going at the moment. So we don't know how long these tariffs are going to be in place. If you look at the sort of beef industry about 5 years ago, when tariffs were put on us, it was about 12 months before they were come through. So there's a lot of unknown, and obviously it is close to home for us in South Australia, and a lot of us have had a big reliance on China in recent years, because they do pay good money for our wine. So we've just got to look at direct to consumer, more cellar door there, and supporting local businesses as well. So it is a bit of a challenge, and I certainly recommend to everyone out there to be pouring sparkling Shiraz or something rather than champagne at Christmas time, and
I'll be doing that.
Supporting our local growers, because although I work for a Chinese-owned company, we're well embedded within the local community, and obviously we employ a lot of local businesses and that in what I'm doing there to make wines.
That's one of the weird things that I still couldn't get my head around. You're working for a Chinese company which grows their grapes in South Australia, but they still have to pay the tariffs to get their own wine back into their own country, which is bizarre. I wanted to wrap up with a couple of questions. One for both of you, because we want to finish on if you're comfortable talking about some of the connections you have made via wine, because I think it's brilliant, especially the Playboy Mansion. However, that's the glitz and glamour side of it. The other thing that really stood out, because we had a great chat last week, and you were saying, hey, as glamorous as winemaking may look, the end product, you're having the expensive bottles, you're having beautiful food. Far out, you work your ass off for it. Like the amount of times I call you, JR, and you cover it very well if you're stressed, but this year especially has been very stressful. I wanted to ask you both, give us a couple of examples of the reality of winemaking. You used one last week of the hours that you were working and the travel. I just want both of you, the realities of winemaking, because we haven't really spoken about it on the podcast yet. I think it's really important to highlight that.
Yeah, so I think it comes back to sort of my military days as well there. It's sort of work hard, play hard, and some people think I'm a little bit crazy doing it twice a year. It is quite a stressful time. We are at the peril of Mother Nature, and grapes have got to come, and they've got to come. And as I mentioned before about 2008, you've got to work until it gets done. And particularly this year with COVID, I lived at the winery essentially for 7 weeks. And my brain's ticking all the time. So I get up at 4:00 and I'm in the winery and digging out a fermenter, pressing that off there well before my guys come into the winery, just to get a start on things. And with limited crews, you go in there and get it done. It is 7 days a week, and particularly for the smaller companies there, it's you work until it's done. So it might be a 16, 18-hour day before you get to knock off and have a beer, have a shower, and then wake up and do it all again. And you do that for, depending on where you're sourcing your fruit from, anything from a month to 3 months. So, it's pretty hardcore.
What about you, JR?
Yeah, definitely from a first drop perspective, we source fruit from the McLaren Vale, the Hills and the Barossa, so our vintages are prolonged. But, once you've done, the vintage and it's, everything's been bedded down, it's, and you've hosed out the winery, then, there's more hard graft in terms of getting out there and working the trade and travelling abroad, whether you're travelling to China or to the US or to wherever you're going, dragging the bag, flights, you're on a 4-week mission, say, to the US, and you've got a different city each day and you've got interconnecting flights. So it's not unusual for me to be on the road for 4 or 5 weeks at a time, 60 or 50 flights in that period, and dinners and lunches and presentations, and sometimes you sit at the airport, you think, wow, I can't get up for the next flight, I'm spent, but they call it and you jump on the plane and you go. Whilst it's on the surface it looks very romantic, and somebody thinks one day I want to retire and open a winery or build a whatever, it's not all beer and skittles, but I guess we wouldn't do anything differently. It's something we love, and it is a tough industry, and it's and now with COVID and now with tariffs and what have you, and then it's going to be a tough 12 and 24 months ahead. But hopefully we can get back on a plane and go and eat some cheese in France and drink some booze and forget about it.
Definitely. We spoke to Brad Ebert from the Port Adelaide Footy Club last episode, and episode 1 we spoke to Channing Fry from Chosen Family Wines in Oregon, and he used to play American basketball, and they were talking about their passion. They lived a life in the spotlight of sport/entertainment, and they were expressing themselves another way, which is we love talking to them about that, because we're not asking them questions about, tell us about your football career or how many points you've scored. We're going, tell us about what you love. And you felt in your journey, you've managed to meet some people and connect with them that wine is their passion, and you become kind of the celebrity in a way, because you're elite in your field, and it's something that they're not, so they connect with you. To finish off, can you please give us a couple of these examples?
Yeah, over the years, and obviously working with Penfolds, and particularly at Magill Estate there, it is so close to the city. So when, particularly with musicians and performers, they obviously like the better things in life, and wine is certainly one of those that's front and centre. And places like Henschke and Penfolds there certainly get a lot of attention from these guys, and we're sort of connected with Michael Gudinski and those sort of guys there. So whenever they come, the performers or whatever like a bit of downtime, and they can come up to Penfolds, and we'll do a little private tasting with them. And these guys are always drinking, the top Napa wines or Burgundy or Bordeaux there. So to be able to put an Australian wine in front of them, that's certainly up against those there, and it certainly really sort of changes their perspective on Australian wine as well. To be able to say, well, hey, these are actually pretty well priced. We think at Grange at $900 is expensive, but compared to some of these wines and the wines that they're drinking, it's a bit of a light bulb moment for those. And we've had several artists that have come out there. Maynard James Keenan, who's the lead singer of Tool and Perfect Circle and Pucifer. His passion for wine made him go out to Arizona and purchase property and start a winery in Arizona. He's a good personal friend of myself and Peter Gogo, and I probably speak to him probably every sort of at least once a week or maybe every 2 weeks there on sort of all things wine. With his touring, he'd always sort of coordinate that around vintage and Grange release. So he'd be in Adelaide and he'd come and work with me at Magill in the winery. So
That's awesome.
Just to be learning the ground roots there, and a lot of the things that we discuss, and he was part of when he'd come and tour here and work at Magill, he now uses and implements in his winery in Arizona, and he's sort of become a bit of a pioneer in that region. And Arizona's had a wine industry probably for about 30 years, but with the support that he has with the local education, and he has a couple of little co-ops that he supports as well, he's really starting to build up that industry. So people like that.
Now, it's important. I'm not asking you to get too specific, because a private tasting's a private tasting. So I can understand that you're respecting privacy of certain people. So I'll put it very simply. How did one of the wine brands you work for end up on a T-shirt on and influenced the television show American Dad, which somehow got you into the Playboy mansion? That's specific enough.
Okay. So through my working in France, I met an American guy called Doug Marjoram. He owned a wine store in Santa Barbara and started a little brand, formed a relationship with the owners, and after working at Shenbleu, the first vintage there, I was looking at doing something in America. So I gave him a call and said, hey, do you know of anyone looking for a winemaker? And he said, come and work for him. So I went and worked for him up in the San Ynez Valley, which is about an hour and a half north of LA, and met a couple of guys that he was doing a couple of little projects with, and one of those was Jeff Fisher. And Jeff Fisher is the character in American Dad. So Seth MacFarlane, the creator of Family Guy and American Dad, created the character after one of his buddies, Jeff Fisher, and how he is in the cartoon is pretty loosely as he is as a person. So we become really good friends, and spending a lot of time down in LA with him, doing the non-tourist tours of LA there. And it probably took me 3 years before I actually went to like Universal Studios or anywhere. We were going to all these top sort of little dive bars and little dodgy restaurants, and he's a real big foodie there. So we spent a lot of time there and become really good friends. And then sort of, obviously I was working with him on projects and making his wine, which opened a lot of doors to his friends. And after American Dad Family Guy Christmas party the day before I was heading back to Australia, the call said, we're heading over to the mansion.
Opened a lot of doors to the Playboy mansion.
And that's all I can say there. That's where the conversation finished.
No, didn't answer the door.
No.
I've got the name of the podcast, what we're going to call this episode. We're going to call it like From Anti-Aircraft to the Playboy Mansion. That's kind of your journey. This has been awesome. Johnny, do you want to wrap it up, mate?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, Jason, very much. It's a fascinating tour throughout your life in terms of military, in terms of wine. One of the best guys that you'll meet in the wine industry, and one of the very best winemakers. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks very much, guys.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.